the host of National Public Radio's A Prairie Home Companion for 13 years.
I'd like to welcome my fellow club members and their guests in the audience today, as well as those of you who are listening to this program over one of the more than 350 national public radio stations or watching on one of the 2,600 cable systems affiliated with C-SPAN, the Cable Satellite Public Affairs Network. Now, before going any further, I'd like to remind our members of some coming luncheons. Our future speakers include Sir David Wilson, the Governor of Hong Kong, tomorrow, a Republican presidential nomination contender, Al Haig, the day after tomorrow, the Chairman of the Navajo Nation, Peter MacDonald, on October 27th, author Cher Haidt on October 28th, television commentator David Frost on November 3rd, Commerce Secretary William Verity, who had a very interesting first day in office yesterday, on November 10, and opera star Beverly Sills will be here on November 18 in her capacity as the 1988 National Chairman of the March of Dimes. Okay, now I'd like to remind those of you in the audience that if you have any questions for our speakers today, and apparently about 60 of you already know, just write them on the cards and hand them in. If you want a little clue as to have a chance to have yours be one of those selected, of the first 65, I would say approximately 63 are about Lake Wobegon. So if we get some on other topics as well, you got a good shot at it. Now, I'd like to introduce the guests at the head table. And I ask our guests to please stand briefly while their names are read, and I also ask the audience to withhold your applause until I've read all the names. We'll start on my left with Bob Minzesheimer of USA Today, Phil Galey, Bureau Chief of the St. Petersburg Times, Richard Moe, the former Chief of Staff for Vice President Walter Mondale, a Minnesotan and a campaign junkie and an attorney. Sue Dukat, producer of Washington Week in Review. Dave Hess of Knight Ridder Newspapers, a former Press Club president. Gil Klein of Media General Newspapers, the chairman of the Press Club Speakers Committee. Bent Skoo, who is Minister Consular for Press and Information at the Embassy of Denmark. Tom Brasidas, Bureau Chief of the Cleveland Plain Dealer. Ellen Masson Persina of Canadian Broadcasting. Dan Devaney, Vice President and General Manager of WETA FM 91. And Diane Ream of WAMU 88.5 FM. Tom DeFrank of Newsweek magazine. Now, I know everybody's wondering why the stock market dropped 500 points yesterday and then began to go back up this morning and then down again, as it does. And to explain all that, we've invited a special luncheon speaker. His name is Garrison Keillor. I am a collector, and my wife's a thrower away, and I'd like to show you an instance of how I triumphed. This is the Thursday, October 24, 1929 edition of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which has Wall Street in panic as stocks crash. The headline, similar to those that appeared in this morning's paper, comes in a genuine reproduction of that edition of the Brooklyn Daily Eagle, which I bought about a month ago, presciently enough, in the St. Louis airport. And one of the things that makes a reproduction interesting is it shows you not just the front page headline, but it shows you the back pages as well. And we learned that on the same day, that day that we were hearing about, that the stock market was crashing, if we turn to the back page of the paper, we'll see a story called Parents Plan Luncheon. Extensive preparations have been completed by the Executive Committee of the Parents Association of PS 217 for a luncheon and bridge Saturday at Ocean's Restaurant in Church Avenue to celebrate the addition of a 7A grade to their school. Mrs. M. Mandel is chairman of the affair. Superintendent James J. Reynolds and Mrs. Melnira Cyberman, principal, will be guests of honor. And I think one of the reasons why those of us in journalism so much have become involved in the audience, in reading and in listening audience for Garrison Keillor, is precisely because we know that a newspaper and life are a lot more than just the front page. When Garrison Keillor spoke here at the club last year, it was being reported that he was in the middle of one of those life crises. He was too famous, and his weekly radio show, A Prairie Home Companion, had 4 million devoted listeners. And his book, Lake Wobegon Days, was a bestseller. And he couldn't walk down the street in St. Paul, Minnesota without being stopped and treated like a celebrity. And for a man who treasures his shyness, it was unbearable, or so the story goes. And Mr. Keillor found a solution. He married his long-lost high school sweetheart, and he flew off with his family to her native Denmark. No more powder milk biscuits and no more quiet weeks in Lake Wobegon. He would learn how to farm, and he wouldn't be famous. He'd be happy. And in fact, his days in Copenhagen were full. He took language lessons, and he got his teeth fixed. And sometimes he combined the two activities, mastering the Danish words for "can you feel pain?" Well, he gave us all a taste of pain at the end of the last school year when his show went off the air. Here in Washington, on the station I listened to, A Prairie Home Companion comes on just before Mary Cliff. She plays folk music records and conducts folk music interviews every Saturday night, starting at 8 and ending at 1 a.m. Mostly it's old favorites. If I Had a Hammer or Sweet Molly Malone, singing about cockles and mussels, alive, alive all. But in another life, I think Mary Cliff used to teach 5th grade, because every once in a while she plays some folk music you never heard of before. And I imagine she thinks it's good for us, and she's stretching our young minds. And one of those times she played some music called klezmer music by a clarinetist named Yuri Feidman. And it's a kind of a wild gypsy-like music that used to be played in Middle Europe at Jewish weddings. And he plays it on a clarinet, and it's a bold, beautiful, clear tone. And it's really memorable. And my wife and I got into the habit that whenever we would hear one of his records on her show, the one who was in the room would call the other one to come on in and listen to this. We never actually called in and requested it. We're like a little too shy. But one day, Shar and I saw in the paper that Yuri Feidman was going to play out at the Barns of Wolf Trap on Saturday night at 8 p.m., and that's about a half-hour drive from our house. So we got reservations over the phone, and we left the house about 7:15 p.m., and of course that's about the time that on the car radio, Garrison Keillor starts his monologue. So traffic was light, and the night was clear, and it was winter night. And we had hardly any red lights, and we zipped right along, and we arrived at the parking lot long before schedule, and Garrison's story was still going on the radio. And it wasn't one of those easy stories either. It was one of those Lake Wobegon stories where you aren't sure how it's going to come out. So we parked the car, and we sat in it, and we listened. We turned off the ignition, so we weren't going to asphyxiate ourselves, but you turn it on back halfway, and you can hear the radio. And finally, the story ended, and we heard those magic words. There we're sitting in that parking lot, surrounded by all those dark cars, and we're hearing the words, where all the women are strong, and all the men are good-looking, and all the children above average. So I opened the door on my side of the car, and I got out, and I slammed it shut, and there was a thunk. And then all across the parking lot, I heard thunk, 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 thunk. And I thought, my God, somebody else listens to him too. And you know, before that, when people asked me where I was from, I used to say I live in Washington. And now when they ask me where I'm from, I tell them Niles, Michigan. It's my hometown, you see. I come from the Midwest. Garrison Keillor was born in Minnesota, which is the second best part of the Midwest. Minnesota, in fact, is a corruption of an Indian word meaning Michigan. And we're all very proud of how well Minnesota has done in recent years. And those of us who cheer for the Detroit Tigers don't feel one bit of envy or bitterness towards the Minnesota Twins just because they're in the World Series. And I mean, really, it's their turn. And, Mr. Minister, we feel the same way about Denmark. Maybe right now Denmark needs Garrison Keillor, or maybe he needs them. And that's okay, too. As long as there are days like today, when the stock market begins to recover from its drop of 500 points, and the stories in the back of the paper are rather reassuring when you compare them to the stories in the front of the paper. And Garrison Keillor drops by to say hello to some of his folks back home. Members and guests, please join me in welcoming the author of Leaving Home, Mr. Garrison Keillor.
Thank you so much for a sweet introduction. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. If I'm responsible for getting the press minister of Denmark up to the head table here, I'm proud of myself and feel that I've accomplished something even before I start in here today. I doubt that when General Haig is your speaker, that the Danish embassy will be represented up at the head table. So I hope that he makes full use of our facilities up here and enjoys it for all it's worth. It's so lovely to be here with you, even on the day after such a catastrophic event, which we think is catastrophic, but we're not sure. And a lot of people in this room are the ones who are supposed to be explaining this to the American people. I don't know how to explain it. I never knew that the Dow Jones average was above 500, so it could fall that far without going through the floor. But it's sobering to walk over to the press club and see the boxes with the two New York tabloids down on the street, the Post and the Daily News, and both of them using second coming typeface on the front to one of them says panic and the other one says crisis. The people who aren't really affected much by that, I guess, are the people back where I come from, Minnesota, where I have now left, where people a week or so ago rose several thousand points, each one of them, and it would take more than a stock market drop to bring them down. Home of the Minnesota Twins. It's a strange thing to stand here, be here with you, and to know that all of that is going on back home. Strange thing to have spent your adult life rooting for a team, and then the very day that you close on your house and get in your car, that same night they clinch the Western Division of the American League. Just when you get outside of the radio signal, they do this and get into the World Series. We had been together, the Minnesota Twins and I, for 20-some years, and many of those years were not that bad. And to have them get into the series now is like, moments after the divorce, your ex-wife says she has found somebody and is ecstatically happy and in love. And you're glad that it's happened to her, of course. You're glad for her, but you wish it had happened while you were still there. Especially those of us who grew up in Minnesota, and we are a different kind of baseball fan than other people. In New York, for example, where people who follow the Mets and the Yankees feel that triumph is due them, is coming to them, demanded and expected. In Minnesota, we tend to be quiet fans because we believe that whatever happens is probably our fault. I always sit at a Twins game and think about the sins in your life that made it necessary for God to do this to these fine young men. So to have them be so successful within hours after I left home is a sad experience. It's like leaving a quiet dinner party, and the host and the hostess beg you to stay longer, but you have to leave, and then you go out to the parking lot and open your car door, and just about then you hear voices raising inside the house, and the Dvorak comes off the stereo, and they put on the James Brown, and there are whoops and cries. The party takes off just when you leave. But we were brought up to believe that eventually our luck would change. We weren't sure when. We're not sure that it has. In Lake Wobegon, where I come from, people are taking a wait-and-see attitude towards it. Waiting for the tide to turn against us, and waiting for the grasshoppers to blacken the skies and fly in and eat the artificial turf. Waiting for things to turn wrong as we deserve for them to. Then after the Twins win the series, waiting 60 or 90 days for a lawsuit. And sometime around Christmas, maybe, starting to believe that we really had that terrific team. We believe that all things come to those who wait. I was brought up to believe, and evidently it is true, and I just didn't wait quite long enough. But that for Twins fans, as for Democrats, as for investors in the stock market, it'll all come round again if you just stand in one place and wait for it to. And that is true. I guess for us Democrats, too, it's true. Back in 1980, I believed that Ronald Reagan could not be elected President of the United States. And in 1984, I believed that Walter Mondale could beat him. And now, as 1988 approaches, I believe that Ronald Reagan cannot be elected to a third term. So, eventually you win. You just have to wait for the rest of them to leave. Somebody asked me downstairs if I was in Washington to promote my new book, which kind of makes me sad for people to think that a man has other motives for coming to Washington, for going around meeting with people. Kind of like the press, to be skeptical like that, to look for hidden motives. What a person does. I travel around to be helpful. I'm not here to promote myself. I'm a Christian, and we don't do that. As reporters find out when they talk to me. I am getting together this afternoon with several people whom I understand work for newspaper and television. But usually when reporters sit down with me, we talk about things for a while, and then we start talking about them. Because I'm here to be helpful. Usually we spend most of the hour talking about them and some of their problems and the treatment and how it worked and their marriage and the last car before this one that they owned, and what a good runner it was, and how they wish they'd hung on to it, and their mortgage and the terms of it, and what they would have gotten if they just waited another year or so. The principle of Christian promotion is back in the book of Proverbs, where Solomon says, let another man praise thee, and not thine own lips. So when you travel around as a sort of retiring celebrity, you find out a great deal about the press, maybe more than is sometimes good for you to know. Those of you who are here and covering this and who are wondering when I would get to the body of my remarks, I have written out for you actually a story here that you could file on this event, saving you the time of having to organize this yourself. If you have tape recorders, you're welcome to turn them on at this point. You're welcome to use any of this if you want. My headline is, I don't know if this fits, if you want something full page, this might not be a long enough headline here, but America needs more time off, says beloved writer. Former American radio idol Garrison Keillor says that American men and women work, quote, too gall-darn hard, unquote, and that Congress should attack the problem of workaholism by passing a national vacation law similar to that in effect in Denmark. Keillor, whose wife is Danish and who spent the summer in the tiny Scandinavian kingdom just north of Germany, spoke Tuesday before a capacity audience, at times almost enthusiastic, at the august National Press Club in Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, which was laid out by the French engineer L'Enfant, thus delaying the author's arrival. Second paragraph. Quote, we've carried the work ethic farther than God ever intended, and he must look down in sorrow at a nation so obsessed with productivity, materialism, and career status and power that its citizens race pell-mell through life, impervious to the beauty of the natural world, the sweetness of fellowship, the joys of idleness, the fine arts of fishing and baseball and slow talk, of slow cooking and long summer evenings on the porch, sipping good whiskey, telling long lies. Close quote. Said the youthful and strangely attractive 45-year-old author of the popular Lake Wobegon days and now of the not unbrilliant Leaving Home, newly published by Viking Press at a sensible low price of $18.95. Quote, Ronald Reagan has, thankfully, released us from the institution of the workaholic presidency and proven that when the chief knocks off, it doesn't cripple the government, but often improves it. A 36-hour presidential week and 5 to 8 weeks of vacation a year are what this country need more of, he said. He called on candidates of both parties to join him in supporting legislation giving every American the right and obligation to take 5 weeks of vacation every year, just as in Denmark, our partner in NATO. Quote, the principle of vacation, of the God-given right to rest, such as the Almighty decreed to the children of Israel, is above and beyond creed or partisanship, close quote, he said in his rich baritone voice, as the normally reserved journalists sighed and chuckled and dabbed at tears of mirth and gratitude. quote, "We owe it to ourselves as a gift. We are a good people. I never met an American voter or book buyer whom I didn't like. We ought to do this as a symbol of our national self-acceptance." Third graph. Keillor's warm green eyes flickered with amusement as his strong hands that obviously had known hard manual labor, gripped the lectern. His features were strong and simple, a gift of his Anglo-Scottish ancestry dating back to colonial days in America. Far from patrician in style, however, he mingled easily with the press, many of whom are Catholic or Jewish. Some of whom had foreign or regional accents. While declining comment on his presidential plans, the gentle satirist has scheduled a foreign policy fact-finding trip to Israel, Sweden, Japan, England, and the Soviet Union, where he will meet with Premier Gorbachev, a close friend from old Boy Scout World Jamboree days. And the tall, relaxed father of four, a devoted son who writes to his elderly parents once a week without fail and phones on holidays and birthdays. A church-going man known for hundreds of little charitable deeds that he wishes to remain anonymous and unsung. Keillor, while poo-pooing persistent rumors of a presidential attempt, saying, "It's much too late, and I can't see subjecting my family to the glare of the public eye. And besides, I can't afford to run because big interest groups know I'm not for sale, no time, no how," close quote, nevertheless sounded almost like a candidate at times, particularly when he admitted to 3 instances of impure thoughts as a youth and said he was briefly addicted to over-the-counter drugs, but is now completely milk of magnesia free. He also sounded a presidential note when he repeatedly used the phrase, "the new civilization," each time pounding his right fist into his left palm and establishing solid eye contact with cameras in the back of the room. And his hair had more body and more lustrous tone. His complexion was clearer than those in the room had seen before, and his smile was not only white but dazzling white. He smelled of a rich Midwestern fragrance, gentle but masculine. He promised that the national 5-week vacation law would be a cornerstone of the new civilization, and said the law would cover not only working people but also unemployed and the impoverished. "It is hard work being poor and homeless," he said. "Poverty is not for the timid. They deserve a break too." Keillor, known as a sensitive man, appeared close to tears at one point while describing a 2-week vacation that he took on Northwest Airlines once. But he regained his composure, and at the conclusion of the address, members of the press who are normally reserved rose as one and had to be restrained, though from what was not immediately apparent. The book is available at good bookstores everywhere. Listen, you're awfully smart. You're awfully nice, and it's lovely to come here and break my retirement with you. It's a frightening thing to get up in front of a microphone and be on radio and talk to a room full of people after months of not doing it, months in another country, in Denmark, where if an American can say good morning and thank you and where is the railway station, they think that you're just brilliant. especially your mother-in-law does. I've thought of you often during the summer. I have missed you far more than you ever could have missed me. And now I would like to get on to your questions. Gosh, I'm just looking down here at some of them. How many of you in this room, let me ask you a question. How many of you in this room believe that honesty is always the best policy? How many of you believe that honesty is sometimes a good strategy? All right, I'll take that into consideration. Are you going to read these, or do I get to take my choice?
He says, you left home seeking anonymity. Now you are back. What did you gain from the experience?
Well, I'm not sure that I'm back. I left behind an apartment in Copenhagen and a lot of people there whom I miss, and a language that I have just begun to try to scale. You can't stay away from Danish very long if you are serious about learning it. Anybody who is married to a Danish woman had better try to learn it. And even now, I feel my language slipping away from me. Måske jeg skal fortælle dig på dansk. Perhaps I should tell you this in Danish. Hvis jeg taler dansk, if I speak Danish, du måske kun ikke tror det er morsom. You may not think it is humorous. Men du kan ikke sige sikker på, du kan ikke være sikker på, det er ikke morsom. But you could not say for sure that it wasn't funny. The people who laughed at that the hardest are the Danes who are here. Yes.
Do you miss your radio show? Do you expect to do another?
Well, I don't expect very much. I've been living in New York for the last couple of weeks, and New York teaches you that. Not to expect anything in particular from each given day, but to sort of ride out whatever happens. But I miss it. I miss it terribly. I could not find any work in Denmark that I was the least bit useful at, except for washing dishes. As we see these headlines in the paper, we start to think about other career skills that we may have, and washing dishes is one of mine. I put myself through a part of college washing dishes, which is why I do it so seldom now that I'm married, because I'm a professional, and I can handle large amounts of them, but to do just a few doesn't really interest me that much. Same reason that journalists don't write letters. But I did dishes in Denmark, and our sink, you stand at the sink and wash dishes, and the first thing that I missed was that the person who was standing next to me and drying the dishes was Danish, and so did not know the words to the same songs that I know and that I used to sing with my sister when I did dishes. That's what I miss about the radio, is singing songs with people who know the words. But as I stood there and I we have a cupboard. You look directly into the cupboard when you stand at the sink and wash. You've got to slump a little bit if you're a tall person. And that brings your face forward. And there's a cupboard right there. And when the doors are open, you can see the cups and the saucers in the front. But in the back, it's dark. I often imagined you sitting in the back of my cupboard. And I spoke to you sometimes this summer in English. Spoke directly in past the salt shakers. You don't want to wait here for what sounds like a definite sort of a conclusion to one answer before we... I tend to trail off on these here.
Well, this questioner wants to know if you would please announce and pronounce slowly your new address and phone number for those of us who want to contact you after this luncheon.
You mean in Denmark, the Danish address? I'm not sure you could pronounce it or know how to spell it. But Denmark is a small country. So you just ask anybody that you meet over there, and they can give you directions.
Apparently, Washingtonian wants to know, do you and your fellow Minnesotans still feel a collective guilt for stealing our baseball team?
Well, I don't think you did an awful lot with that baseball team. The Washington Senators, the old Senators, not the more recent ones, it became a legendary team, but for the wrong reasons. As it became a legendary loser, like the Chicago Cubs. That's what the Minnesota Twins are supposed to be saving us from this week and next, is from getting into national mythology in a way that we'd like to avoid. After 4 years of the Vikings being in the Super Bowl, and Hubert Humphrey losing so narrowly in 1968, and Walter Mondale losing in 1984. I think one more, and we go into the record books. We'd like to avoid that if we can. In Minnesota, we have had many opportunities in the last couple of decades to learn that second place doesn't taste like anything at all in particular. So we'll see.
Most of us know how the Twins are doing these days, but what about the Whippets?
Well, the Whippets' season ended earlier than the Twins did. It always ends around Labor Day. People that age, as some of the Whippets, do not like to do strenuous activities outdoors when it's cool. There were members of the Whippets who would have been glad to see the season end even before Labor Day, because we believe in hoping for next year, but you can only do that when the season is over.
Did anyone from Lake Wobegon organize a trip to St. Louis for tonight's World Series game?
Are they down in St. Louis tonight? All right. No. We, St. Louis, it's odd. They're being on the Mississippi River, the same as we are and everything, but I don't know anybody in Minnesota who's been to St. Louis. It's just not, it's not a city that's closely tied to us by commerce or culture or anything. It's a blank to me. I can't remember the last time I was there. Trying to remember, and I can't.
Can Bob's Bank survive the stock market plunge?
Bob's is never invested heavily in anything that you couldn't personally visit in about a half hour. Bob does not believe in sending money by mail. Money is a personal thing to Bob and his bank. They may not pay high interest rates, but it'll be there when you need it, provided you have a good explanation for why you want it. I think the terrifying thing about this stock market crash, or whatever you want to call it, is the idea that this could all be going on between computers with human beings hardly involved at all. That these vast banks of computers all over the country using the phone lines are battling each other for stocks, and that we have no part in this. Evidently, you find that shocking too.
Has the recent news about the private life of television ministers had any impact on the Gospel Birds?
Well, the Gospel Birds are a traveling troupe of Christian performers who go around and perform at churches in small towns that have attendance problems for the midweek services. In larger cities, they've given up the midweek service years and years ago. But in Lake Wobegon, they still have hopes of bringing people out to sit in church on a Wednesday night. The Gospel Birds, I think, are as yet untouched by scandal. It's an impressive troupe. Little parakeets and parrots and pigeons and the birds that reenact favorite stories from the Old Testament in costume, taken around by the Lundins, a lovely, lovely couple. And I wish that I had written a story about them that was really faithful to them. Such sweet people. That's what happens, see, when you make reference here to a story that I've told you in the past. I've had 3 months off to more than that, 5 months, to sit and contemplate all of these people whom I've told stories about, the Lundins and the Gospel Birds and all the other people. And a storyteller has to keep working. If you ever stop and think about what you've done, you just feel such guilt for not having done better by these people. So do you have another question about Lake Wobegon that I can...
This one starts with a dangling modifier. It says, being a normal guy, explain to me how to deal with so many New Yorkers and retain your normalcy.
Well, I think you have to forget about normalcy if you are living in New York. There are a lot of things that our mothers taught us to do to be nice, polite people. You have to put those away when you're in New York. To go through life in New York without ever raising your voice, speaking in a sharp manner to another person, without pushing, without to go through life in New York with the principle of taking turns. It's another piece of our raising that hangs around our necks like a millstone when we get in a big city. Lutherans who have moved away from Minnesota to big cities who sit half the evening on entrance ramps at freeways just waiting. You have to put those things aside. Otherwise, you're giving up all of your weapons. You're throwing yourself on their mercy, and I'm not sure if their mercy is anything I'd want to count on for a long time. But I like New York. I love New York. It's an exciting city. I've always been thrilled by it since I was a little kid. Those old radio shows I listened to as a boy came from New York. New York was the first place I traveled as a boy. My dad took me there in 1953, and I got to see the Brooklyn Dodgers play at Ebbets Field, see Coney Island. I never forgot it, especially because he didn't really want to take me. But he did, and it's the trip of my life was that trip that I took when I was 11 years old to the big city. It's the trip against which all other trips are compared. I could tell you everything about that trip, where we stayed, and almost everything that we did. So if you have 11 or 12-year-old kids, you keep that in mind. Whatever you do for them may likely turn out to be permanent and memorable. Other people in Minnesota, other people like Wobegon, they kind of looked to California as the place to go if things did not work out. That may be true. I looked to New York as the place to go if everything worked out right.
Would you ever write a play?
Well, I've threatened to in the past, but the people who I try to write about, I'm not sure that there are actors and actresses who can portray them. There's a peculiar dialect that these people have that they don't teach in drama school. It's kind of a murmuring dialect. It's kind of a trailing off at the end of sentences, and one thing in particular that we do in Lake Wobegon that I don't think you could do on a stage is uttering some of your most important lines while you're going into the next room, so that the last part of it disappears entirely. It'd be difficult to do on a stage.
Have this week's stock market developments helped business at the fearmonger shop?
Well, is this the worst that can happen? We don't know that. I don't think it's quite gotten to that point yet. But of course, I haven't looked at the afternoon paper yet. Is there an afternoon paper?
Several people wanted to know if there's a song that you would like to sing with us today.
Really? That's awfully sweet of you to think of that. Of course there is. Over in Denmark, a country that I have been trying to figure out, and a country that I felt so much more certain of my opinions about it the first week I was there than I did a month later. I felt after a week in Denmark, I felt I could write a book about it. And then after about a month or so, I thought I could write a magazine article about it. And now I'd be satisfied to say 3 true things about that country. But one thing I say for sure is that Danes love occasions like this, know how to throw a party, know how to have a good time. If this were in Denmark, this chicken that we ate today would have been a little bit different. There would have been more than 2 speakers. All Danes insist on their right to speak at a banquet like this. It would have gone on for hours. We would have had 12, 15 different speakers. And we would all have sung a song if this were Denmark. Do you know Tell Me Why? Do you know that? That's about where C is, right where I'm humming, right there. Here's kind of a faint murmuring sound there. Try that C again, you did that better than you could have if I'd shown you. Now the women have to just go up about 2 steps to get the harmony part. Okay, remember that top part. The women get to sing that lovely high harmony part, that descant part that you all know. Tell me why the ivy twines. I forget the words to this song. Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the sky is so blue, and I will tell you why I love you. You're right. Men have to sing the melody. Tell me why the ivy twines. Tell me why the stars do shine. Tell me why the sky is so blue, and I will tell you just why I love you. Sing a special verse here for the Minnesota Twins. Take me out to the ball game. Take me out with the crowd. Buy me some peanuts and cracker jack. I don't care if I never come back. You women have to sing that high harmony part. You're the beauty of this song. Just as you are in real life, you're the beauty and the meaning of this song. If you give up your part, there's no reason to sing it. What's the last verse? Because God made the stars to shine. Because God made the ivy twine. Because God made the sky so blue. Because God made you. That's why I love you. Sweet singer. Thank you.
Give you an award. Here.
And in addition to a certificate of appreciation, I'd like to present you with the National Press Club pen, which according to the accompanying material is a space pen that will write underwater over grease at temperatures of minus 50 degrees to over plus 400 degrees Fahrenheit and 250,000 miles into space.
Can't beat that.
And I'd like to thank you very much and ask you a question that we must ask of all speakers this year because of our responsibilities at the club. If elected, how frequently will you hold news conferences?
I tell you, if elected, I will serve, and if elected, I will hold news conferences more often than you would like.
You've been watching an address of the National Press Club by author and radio humorist Garrison Keillor. This reminder, C-SPAN will air a National Press Club address Sunday morning by Sir David Wilson, the governor of Hong Kong. That's at 7 a.m. Eastern Time, 4 Pacific.